I'm going to try to be as practical as possible in this presentation. And so one of the things I'd like to just kind of try to understand before I dive into it is how many people have actually published a book? Okay. All right. So most of us. And then how many people have used BookBub before? Okay. And then now this is a random question. How many people have gotten above 3% CTR? Okay. All right. So my goal here for all of you is to kind of hopefully give you the tools to get better results with BookBub. But before I start, and this presentation is a bit of a challenge for me because there are people from all different levels, right? All different genres, and things don't work the same, don't work equally for everyone. Different genres have different results. And the second challenge to this presentation is that this is not a magic bullet. And in fact, I hope now that we're kind of at the tail end of this conference, that like most of you are walking away from this realizing that there is no magic bullet. It's do the work, all right? And doing the work means a lot of different things. And one of the things it means is actually read in your genre. And as much as I'm talking about ads, this will not work for you unless you read in your genre. Okay, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what that means. But first off, what is BookBub? All right, so BookBub is basically a online repository of book recommendations. It is massively powerful. I mentioned this last year, where my mother finds my new releases on BookBub and gets very upset at me because I don't tell her about the new releases because she screws up Amazon's algorithm. All right, and so it's a bit of a contention, and she doesn't care about Amazon's algorithm. Luckily, she has since given up Kindle Unlimited and moved to Kobo. She can't get my books anymore. All right, but that's another story. So it's latest and greatest focused, okay, which is to say that it is new release focused. It is very much discount focused, and in addition to that, like it does have functionality that allows readers to do recommendations, reviews, archive, and follow. And there are functionality on BookBub that every single one of you can use. So for example, having that organic traffic where your readers are recommending your book is a wonderful thing to do. In addition to that, using BookBub's feature deals, right? And there's a few of them now. Another wonderful thing to do. But I'm not going to talk about any of that here, okay? Because what I'm going to focus on is the ads. And specifically, I'm going to be focusing on CPC ads, right? And I'm using this language, probably if you went to Mal's presentation, you know what I'm talking about, but it's cost per click ads. Okay, and we're really, I want to get into the nuts and bolts, but why use it? Okay, and there are a few reasons, right? I mentioned my mother, I mentioned the different uses for it, but ultimately the reality is that email is king still, right? Like it is, like I think that like in terms of the hierarchy of the best way to promote your books, number one is word of mouth. Right? And word of mouth can come through social media shares. It can come through just actual people talking about you. But number one is word of mouth. And then number two, I think in terms of what you have the most control over, is email. And the last reason why I think BookBub is good for you, actually no, I'm going to talk about that point in a minute. So to speak to email is king. So here's an example of a BookBub email. Okay, and so, from this line and above, from that line and above, these are BookBub's recommendations. And BookBub's recommendations are based on a whole host of factors, including you got a feature deal. In other words, you paid for them to recommend you. Now, they highly curate the stuff, so even though you want to pay for that recommendation, Craig Martell famously requested a BookBub feature deal 99 times before he finally got one. And personally, I think that the people in the BookBub office were sitting in the back just giggling and saying, well, give it to him at 100. All right? And then finally, you get below that, you get the ad. And as you can see, the ad kind of stands out a little bit, right? And if you click on that ad, that's when BookBub will charge you, and now you have someone going to your book page, okay? The reason why this is important, sorry, I have to keep going between my glasses, and it's so annoying. The reason why this is important is because not only is email king, in other words, it's a great way to reach your readers. BookBub is highly trusted. Okay, so that's a huge advantage to you. You're not trying to, I mean, how many of us get spammy emails? The reality is that to most of your readers, you're a spammy emailer, right? And this is why it's up to you to learn how to kind of reach your reader in a fun and pleasant way so they don't view you as spammy, okay? But BookBub has done that for you. It's done that heavy lifting for you. They do not view, most readers do not view BookBub as spammy. And it's great for augmenting launches and fixing also bots. And it can be used for ongoing series, but there are some caveats to that. So before I go on, does everyone understand what an also bot is? Does everyone understand how Amazon's algorithm works? All right, so first of all, I really think this is an important thing for everyone here to do. When we say, or any of these presenters say, Amazon algorithm, just substitute it for audience, right? Because ultimately that's what it is. The algorithm is a reflection of what people want, okay? But it's a bit of a heartless reflection of what people want because there's no opportunity for you to convince them that you're weird cyberpunk, yeah, she's an augmented cyborg, but she's also a cook. Isn't that a cool, right? Like that's hard to communicate. And so ultimately you want to open the door by having a very kind of like top line attraction, right? It's like kind of going on a first date. You don't wear socks with holes in them, preferably, no mustard stains. All right. Okay, so how do you know, so it is important, so how do you do that with Amazon's algorithm? And the answer is that you initially, especially in the first bit of your launch, so the first, say, 3 to 6 weeks, you target your readers. It is very important that you're not telling your mother. Your mother loves you, and this is a disadvantage because she is going to tell everyone to buy your book. And in my case, what happened is my mother, she runs a Gestapo, I'm sure. She's greatly feared. And so when I launched my first book, Amazon went, fantastic, we know exactly who likes Ramy's teenage vampire romp. Women over 70 who are into knitting and baking, right? And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. By the way, I just want to do a quick caveat on this. My readership are actually women over 50, which really surprised me because the kind of stuff that I was, especially in the early days that I was writing, I really thought like I would basically get men between the age of 18 and 30. And any men between the age of 18 and 30 here? You suck because you don't read. All right, like, yeah, they don't, well, I'm sure some do, but like, they're not a big demographic. So women over 50, all of y'all, I love you. All right. So how do we understand who to target? And it's cyber stalking, okay? And I really mean this in the full extent of the word, right? Like, it's important that each and every one of you go through the garbage of the people who you think are most related to what you are writing. Okay, it is important that you really get down to the nitty-gritty of it. It starts with genre, obviously, right? Like if you're writing fantasy, you're not going to be targeting thrillers. But you got to boil it down to the subgenre, and then you have to boil it down to the dominant tropes that you are using. Now, do we all know what tropes are? Okay, so I'm just going to go through a quick example of a trope. It's like, ooh, look at him, isn't he saucy? Oh my God, he's a vampire, right? So that's the Twilight trope. But when you boil it down to its essence, right, it's about a supernatural being pretending to be human looking for love. And when you look at it that way, you realize that that trope exists in many stories, including the original Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is about Dracula, a supernatural being, pretending to be a count, looking for the reincarnated soul of his dead wife. Okay? So I could talk a lot about how tropes work in this, but ultimately, what is the fix you're going to give the reader? Right? Because if you're writing billionaire boyfriend, it is a different fix than if you are writing mafia boyfriend. Right? And they are different genres. Now, they'll have an overlap in readership, for sure, but you're presenting yourself to the person who's interested in mafia, not billionaire. Now, they might be interested in both, but Amazon's algorithm, it doesn't care. Like, it's looking towards the readers who are doing this. And so how do you do this? And the trouble is, or the challenge is that for most of you, like if you're an experienced writer who's written many books, this tends to become less and less true. But if this is your first book or second book, you're looking at your book like this beautiful, unique snowflake angel who has come into this world to bring joy to everyone, right? But the truth is that in other words, you look at it like you would look at your child, right? But your child, as beautiful as your child may be, is a pile of screaming pus to the guy sitting 3 rows behind you, right? And you need to look at your book in the same way that that reader will look at your book, okay? So, Amazon, if you're here, I hate you. And I hate you because you've changed things, okay? So, back in the day, and by back in the day, I mean last year, right? You could look at, if you found a couple people who are your tier ones, so in this case it's Kimber Swain, she's like one of my tier ones, right? You could look at customers who also bought. And there are multiple locations to do this. Amazon has mostly removed the also bots. Every now and then, and I live in the UK, so maybe they're just experimenting in the UK. Every now and then they do reappear briefly, it seems, at the very bottom of the page, like really at the totally, go down to the very bottom. I have noticed them, and then I go back like a day later and they're gone again, right? It has made our job harder, okay? Because ultimately, when looking for your also bots, when trying to figure out who to target, it is about targeting those key people. So now what still does work is here, sorry, I don't even remember how I sequenced this, so forgive me. Sorry, I'm gonna walk away. Here, so customers also bought items by, so that's her profile page, okay? And then in Goodreads, you got this section here, okay? So readers also enjoyed. And they're reasonable resources. The problem with the Goodreads one is that, what do you call it? It is a Goodreads kind of, it's not Amazon's concept of also bots. So it might be a differently trained algorithm, so you might not be getting it correctly. But again, and I really need to emphasize this point, substitute algorithm for audience, right? Because if you do that, then you're still maybe giving them the same hits, okay? All right, so other cyber stalking hotspots. Newsletters, so hopefully you're following your tier one, like you've subscribed to their newsletter, and every now and then an author will do a shout out for someone else. And if it's an author who knows what they're doing, they will only shout out books that fit their audience, right? And that's not always the case. And sometimes there's some horse trading. So you have to kind of ask yourself, like, are they shouting out for their audience, or are they shouting out to make a connection with another author? Or, you take it with a bit of grain of salt, but it can be a good location. Facebook, right? So going on Facebook groups, like a trick that you can use, but I mean, do this, don't be, and you've heard this expression throughout your lives, but don't be a dick. But if you go on someone's Facebook group and say, oh my God, I just read their series, I love it, I'm looking for my next fix, any recommendations, that can be a great resource, okay? But again, be careful doing that, because like if you're in a author's fan page, you know, you don't want to distract from their bread and butter, right? A lot of times, just simply being present in their Facebook groups, people will just organically recommend other books, right? And then, of course, if you're doing fan groups, that's, you know, that's cool, because that's just for the genre, right? So if you are writing urban fantasy, there's a Facebook group called Fans of Urban Fantasy. Like, they couldn't be more obvious, right? And so then it's up to you to ask, like, about the tropes that you are interested in reader language, right? So spending time on the Facebook groups teaches you reader language, because if you say I'm looking for a new, well, actually, I suppose this would work, but I'm looking for a new academy, most readers will understand academy, right? But if there are some kind of like writer language descriptors that probably don't translate to reader, of course, I can't think of an example right now. Okay? Facebook profile, Facebook page, Facebook group. Okay, other social media sites, and then ask the fan sites, and of course BookBub, right? Because you know, that's a wealth of information. And so my recommendation here is set up a BookBub account, but only follow your tier 1s. Okay? So set up a new account, only follow your tier 1s, and then, you know, scratch your head violently when you're trying to figure out why they recommended you the latest Lee Child's book when you're clearly into Billionaire Boyfriend. I don't know why I'm picking up Billionaire Boyfriends. Anyone writing Billionaire Boyfriends? Best of luck. You are in a competitive hell, but more power to you, because if you can break into it, you're golden. Mafia, by the way, seems to be very hot. All right, step 2, add images. All right, so earlier I mentioned that it's focused on latest and greatest, right? And discounts. They're bargain hunters. So when you create an ad, you know, what's the value proposition? 99 cents and Kindle Unlimited. Now, I'm going to talk about this book later. This is an old campaign I ran a year and a half ago, and for this presentation, I actually did a whole bunch of BookBub ads just to kind of make sure things are relatively the same. And they are mostly the same. Like, there hasn't been a drastic change. There's been a bit of a change in terms of like how BookBub spends your money, right? But for the most part, it's the same. But this image here, like, you know, we'll get into it a little bit more, because again, what's the value proposition of this, right? And so there's a bit of a trick question, but I just want to kind of ask now. So it's obviously 99 cents, right? And it's obviously Kindle Unlimited. But what's the other value proposition here, right? If anyone just wants to take a stab. Huh? Dragons, exactly. And then one last value proposition. Huh? Action. Well, that wasn't what I was going for, but yeah, sure. There's one more value proposition that I would say is a dominant value proposition. Huh? Yeah, that's the 99 cents. It's humor. All right? Okay. Right? So if you read it, they say revenge is best served cold. Personally, I like mine with a side of dragonfire. Right? So a bit of humor. We know that we're going to get a humorous dragon story, modern setting because of her clothing, right? And it's on Kindle Unlimited, and it's 99 cents. So I'm really trying to load this image with as much value proposition as possible. But again, algorithm, think audience. Who do I want to read this series? And I want people who like urban fantasy, who are into humor and dragons. And I'll tell you right now, there's not many of them. So, I mean, this series did okay, but it was not by any means my best-selling series, right? So, but it did okay. Like you know, and there's always that element of, did I hit the tropes right? Did I market it right? Did I launch it right? You know, but yeah. So, images that worked. Okay, images that worked. So these images gave me some of the best results of my career. Now, I should note, that Amazon BookBub gives you these templates, and they've, recently one of the changes in the last year is they've diversified the templates. So historically, the templates suck, and that has remained the same. So and again, I will say, that said, a friend of mine uses the templates and gets amazing results for his contemporary sci-fi. Okay, so test. I tested the new templates. I tested all kinds of stuff with it just to see what works, and it sucked for me. It doesn't necessarily suck for you. Okay. Now, I want to point out the image to the very left, right? So the guy with the war hammer and the swirling thing. So that's the scientific word for it, swirling thing. So this book is a book that I co-authored with Anderley, okay? Now, what's interesting is historically, I have targeted Anderley before I started co-authoring with him on BookBub, and my results were absolute shit, okay? Like, just terrible results, okay? I released this book. This is the very first thing that I co-authored with Anderley. So at this moment, no one knew that I was an Anderley co-author, okay? In addition, nothing about this image says Anderley, and it worked like gangbusters. Why? My theory, and it is a theory, is that that image was created by Jake Caleb, one of Anderley's top designers, okay? And as a result, his readers are trained for this style. Now, that's my theory. I don't have any evidence beyond what I have told you, but it worked amazingly well. I was getting 6.7% click-through rate, which I'll talk a little bit later, because that's the golden number, is what's your click-through rate. So, and just spoiler alert, anything above 3% is decent. So, okay. So, images that didn't work. This one, also an Anderley book. Oh, and by the way, I should mention, hands down, the worst thing I've ever done, that series, in terms of performance. I actually liked the books. I think the books were great, but in terms of sales, were hands down the absolute worst thing. First thing I ever did with Anderley, abysmal failure. He still kept me around. I think he's sadistic. He wants failure in his life, so he kept me on. All right, so images that didn't work. All right, okay? And again, for me. Now, what's interesting about this is my little game here of spot the difference. What's the difference? Yeah, okay. So why did the image on the left work, but the image on the right did not work? Well, it doesn't say free. It says new. So the image on the left, this one, I was getting, I can't quite remember, but like 10+%. And this one was a complete failure, targeting the same authors, right? And why did it work? And I don't have a theory for you, but remember the guy I was telling you about who, uses the templates and seems to get great results? He has a theory. So Craig Falconer, he didn't come to my talk because his girlfriend's speaking in another panel simultaneously, and he picked her. If you see him, tell him Ramy's very upset and was crying in his presentation. So Craig Falconer's theory is, so new versus 99 cents, but ultimately, like, what are dragons, right? Dragons are kind of, in many ways, the epitome of badassedness, right? And so when I'm putting on 99 cents in Kindle Unlimited, I'm kind of begging, right? Whereas when I'm doing new, and you'll note as well, the dragon is, I mean, it's hard to tell, but slightly bigger and stuff like that. Like, when I do this, like, the value proposition's the dragon. It's not new in the Kindle Unlimited. So we're focusing on it. But the key point here, because you will think to yourself, like, 99 cents Kindle Unlimited is to test. And speaking of test, here we go. All right. So this is the meat. Okay, if you can do this successfully, not just for BookBub, but for everything that you do, and if you can do this, what's the word, judiciously, right? Like, so, you know, testing is a form of writer's procrastination, right? So if you can do this like with discipline, for your newsletter, for social media posts, for read through, sell through, click through, all of those stuff, if you are able to do this, you will have a career, right? But if you cannot do this, you're kind of dead in the water unless you find someone to do it for you, right? You know, you co-author with someone who will do the testing. You work with a publisher who is good at marketing, whatever it is, okay? But that's my word of warning to everyone, is that no one likes this, everyone needs to do this. So the dashboard, just in general, so that we're all on the same page when I kind of go through this, there are 3 key factors for me, and again, for me, right? Like different BookBub people have different approaches and different styles, and my 3 key factors are effective cost per click. So how much is it costing me to get a click? How much of my budget is being spent, and what's my click-through rate? Okay, so of the 3 ads that are in place here, the only one that was any good for me was targeting Martha Carr. With one, I can't remember now, to be honest, which image it was. I think it's the new image. I can't remember. Okay. All right, so what does it look like? Okay, so this is, and again, a lot of you who have done BookBub, I'm just kind of sharing the dashboard so we're all on the same page, right? But kind of one key point that I want to make sure is like, make sure you give it a name, and make sure that campaign name stays consistent for every ad you create, because what happens when you build the name is it creates folders, and the folders allows you to better measure and keep track of your results, okay? So once you get through, you get different links for different stuff. So for example, I have this paradise-lot.com/dragon USA, and it's a USA retailer only. So a couple spoiler alerts. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but anyway, I'll just say it. So that link is an Easter egg. It's gonna come back. Are you on Tinderhooks? Now it's like, well, how's the link going to come back? I can't handle the suspense. That was my goal. All right. And then secondly, you'll note that I have one link for the US and one link for the UK. Okay. And then if you saw more, you'll see one for Australia and one for Canada, and then the rest of the world can burn as far as I care. So, sorry. So I will target these 4 territories only. Okay, and that's just me again. Like, you know, you do you, boo-boo. All right, so now we get percentages. Now this is funny. So this is an old slide. I kept it on purpose. I thought about switching it out when updating this presentation for this year. So you'll note that the 3rd name on the list is me. So when I target myself, I get 6%. But when I target Theophilus or Nasri Noor, I get more. All right, so it's like, you know, what does that mean? Now, what I will say, though, is when you look at these guys, the one who gives me the best sales is Frank Hurt and Deborah Wild on this list of these 6. So I make more sales targeting Deborah Wild than I make targeting myself. Okay, and this is a key thing to understand. Now, you know, I cried about it a bit. And when I got over it, I realized that I found a nugget for myself. Now, one of the things that I want to kind of say is 1 author per ad, 1 territory per ad. Okay, so when you're testing, you can test multiple territories. Okay. But when you know that this ad works in this territory or whatever, 1 territory per ad, 1 author per ad. Do not target multiple people. Now you can test this, but it has never worked for me, even in like just trying some random ads just to kind of like see if things have changed, or just making sure that this presentation was up to date for this one. Like multiple authors, I don't, if I ever meet a BookBub person, I will, which I have reached out to. I've been ignored. I will want to ask, like, does it work for anyone? Like, because I don't, I talk to a lot of authors about this, and I don't know anyone who has successfully managed to target multiple authors and have meaningful results. Okay. Now, it might work. Again, test, but that has been my results and the results of everyone I've spoken to. I have not, literally no one has said the opposite. So $15 a day, and then you put your bid. Now, with the bid part, right, I'm bidding per impressions versus per click. You have an option in BookBub to target impressions, so 1,000 impressions. So basically, I'm telling BookBub I'm willing to pay up to $30 for 1,000 people to see my ad. Okay? And by the way, they're not necessarily different people, because BookBub will serve your ad to the same people multiple times. It used to be 4 times in a certain period of time. I can't quite remember what it is. You can look it up on BookBub. They'll tell you. And to be honest, I totally forgot to look up the metric differences, because it doesn't matter to what I do. I just know that audiences over time get exhausted, and it means you have to create a fresh ad. That's all that means, right? Okay. And by the way, that is one change. Audience get exhausted way faster now than they did a year ago. So that is a change. But again, I don't quite, I didn't look up for this presentation what the metrics are. Sorry. So if you take away anything from this dashboard kind of little thing, is name your ads properly. Okay? Do not get lazy on this point. Okay? So I have don't feed the dragon. That's what DF the D. Sounds very suggestive. I'm targeting Anderley at $15 to a 99-cent book. Okay? And if this is a test ad where I'll test multiple territories at once, but if this was kind of like a running ad, it would probably have, it would have USA or UK or whatever territory in addition there. Okay? So this is probably the most important slide. And by the way, you guys know that you get the slides are downloadable and blah, blah, blah. But this slide is, I think, the most important one. One author per ad, one territory per ad. Matching the ad to your cover on Amazon tends to work the best. However, not always. So, for example, a friend of mine ran an incredibly successful campaign, and the ad was a stormtrooper, and the cover was a ship. Right? You're telling a story, right? If the first image they see is, and it's not a stormtrooper, it's just like a warrior in white, right? So if the first image you see is a warrior all in white with a big badass laser gun, and then the next thing you see is a ship, okay, we're getting a real sense of the kind of story we're going to get. You're telling a story. But typically speaking, matching the cover to the ad is the best result, because you're creating a coherence between the two, right? And there are kind of like multiple advertisement theories and whatever, but they all boil down to this, without getting into the grid of it, they all boil down to this fact, is that we as human beings need to be exposed to something multiple times before we take action, right? And so love at first sight is actually two people ready for love, looking for love, familiarize themselves with the concept of love at first sight, finding each other, and then having the pheromones, because I'm convinced it's all smell-based, because my wife is way too good looking for me. And so I just think I give out the right pheromones. So there we go. All right, CPMs only, high bids, low budget. 3% click-through rate, check daily, test everything, images, authors, territories, everything, okay? This is what it is. And when it gets back, when we get into the testing, here's the testing flow, right? So this is my system, and I do not have your answer, all right? So you really need to just take this as a guideline and make this your own, all right? And by the way, this piece of advice is to every presentation you've seen in this conference, because every one of these guys are telling you their story and what worked for them. And all that's doing is cutting out some of the bullshit for you to get closer to what's going to work to you, for you. I write words for a living. All right, so I using Canva, but you know, whatever you use, excuse me. I will make about 60 images. Okay? And like you see, some of the images are 99 cents versus new. These are very basic stuff, right? And then I'll pick 4. And I'll test those 4 images with one author. So all four different ads to Martha Carr in 4 different territories. And at the end of this, I'll know which image works the best for Martha. I'll do this for a handful of authors. Now, I'm lucky because I know who works for me, generally speaking. So I kind of picks a handful of authors, myself included, and I'll test these 4 images. And if the images are working, so for example, I tend to test 4 diverse images, right? And so it would be like a dragon on one, and then, you know, an ogre on another, and a this on, you know, I'll try different images. And so when the dragon wins, then I often will do a second round of testing where I'll do 4 rounds of dragon variances, right? So it's like 99 cents versus new, Kindle Unlimited, you know, so I'll try to narrow down even more. I'll retest if inconclusive, and I'll add images if necessary. I generally give myself about it used to be less, and it's just over time growing and growing and growing, but about a $300 testing budget. And I will set the ad for $3 a pop. Okay, so that gives me about 100 ads that I can test. Okay. Image testing tips. Different territories have different results. The Brits like different things. They are aesthetically different than Americans. And it's funny because like I have authors who are extremely I know authors who are extremely successful in the UK, but not in the US. And then you talk to them about their cover, and they will not change their cover because they're doing so well in the UK. But this is one guy in particular writes gritty thrillers, okay? And his cover is just killing it in the UK are just a bunch of random murder weapons on a cover, but they're all cartoonish, right? It's gritty, and I got like a cartoon drawing of an axe, right? And it's just like, well, in the US, you know, you would have a very different cover because, you know, Americans want to feel the danger. Like, that's my theory, at least. Whereas the Brits just want to have it implied. All right, so different days have different results, okay? And then do it over and over again. In fact, actually, okay, no, I'll save that. Okay, so once you have the images, remember one author per ad, $3. You're looking for anything above 3% click-through rate. Take note of territories. Different authors perform better or worse depending on the territory. So there's this one author, what's her name? Lisa Blackwood, I think, if she's here. Hi. I think her name's Lisa Blackwood. Forgive me. I mean, man, I kill with her in Australia. That's her pen name. Is that her pen name? Does we know her? Okay. Yeah, well, tell her that I target her in Australia. She's amazing. But everywhere else, like, just terrible results. And I don't know why, right? Like, and I don't quite get it, but like she is, she's a great target there. So, and in one book in particular, like I was top 100 in Australia for like 4 months. And I was like top 2,000 in the US for that same period of time. And despite being top 100, like I was 64 was the lowest I got. Despite being top 100 compared to top 2,000, the U.S. was still like 5 times the income. All right. So if this is overwhelming to you, just focus on the U.S. Because if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. That's actually not true, because remember, Brits like implied danger. So, but in all seriousness, like, so like me personally, I've typically done well in Australia and the U.S. Canada, despite my books being set in Canada, or at least my flagship series is set in Canada, that never had any traction. Oh shit, I only have 4 minutes. Okay, all right, so here's how I look at it. So you got your percentages, right? Once I get my percentages, I start kind of like picking my authors, my tier ones. I start testing them. And then once I'm ready to go, because all the green ones are proving to be authors to target, now it's time to start my series, right? So, sorry, my launch, right? Because I do this primarily for launches. I do not do this to maintain sales long term. I do this just for launches. I'm sure you could do this to maintain sales long term. It has never worked for me. It's just too expensive. But for a launch, to test your also bots is really good. And here's a fun mistake I made. So in prepping this for like updating it and making sure everything stays the same, I did this little ad. Okay. Now I had about 16 images I was testing because I just wanted to make sure everything was up to date. And I stupidly put the same image on all 16 ads. All right. And on day one, I was getting, like, one ad was getting me 4%, one ad was getting me 0.73%. It was like all over the place. And I was like, oh man, BookBub's full of shit. But so I let it run for a couple days just to see, because like it's nothing I'd ever done before. It was a mistake. So I let it run for a couple days, and holy guacamole, it all balanced out. And so that's part of the challenge here, is that like just a single day's results when testing is a good indicator. It's not necessarily the final answer. So you have to keep track with it. And then the final thing is that like this is a testing rabbit hole. You can test so many things. And so to that end, like, you know, pick your poison. Oh, sorry. Pick your poison, right? And like I said, like I don't test times of days. I don't overdo it on who I'm targeting. If I find 10 authors that work for a launch, that's all I'm sticking with. I don't need more than 10 authors. I don't keep like obsessing with it. And I think that it is a waste of time to obsess with it. And really you got to pick your poison. Now, the rabbit hole that I have done is I will send them in the pre-order phase, right? So in the testing phase, to a landing page. This is click or die, right? Like click or leave. And that helps me figure out the actual conversion rate. So if I'm getting 10 clicks, it's like, okay, so I'm getting, 50 clicks on BookBub and 10 people go on to Amazon. That's a 1 in 5. But when you're actually launching on Amazon, send them straight to Amazon, because this is a distraction, right? You'll lose people on the way. But in terms of recording your results, this is a great tool. And then it's time to hit it, okay? Augment with all this stuff. And then I'm going to give you a bonus tip to end with, okay? So this is for the technically savvy among you. So what you can do is send your, in Amazon, send your book to your website. Remember the USA, whatever, like paradise-dragon.usa. But then I send it as a redirect link using an affiliate link to Amazon. This is 100% against Amazon's terms and services, okay? This is why I don't have a paper trail. But you are exposing a loophole. And this loophole is, well, technically they did go to your website first and then spend about a quarter of a second there before going to Amazon. And this can help you track. Like, I'm not trying to get that 4 cents bounty from affiliate links. I'm just trying to get some understanding. And I understand that Amazon has released these associate links. I forget what they're called. Attribution links, thank you. But they're like a 3-day, and I was talking to Mal earlier today, a 3-day to 2-week delay on them. So it's not useful for a launch. All right, so do this trick at your own peril. Like, you know, you may be kicked off of Amazon affiliates. That's kind of the worst that will happen, is you'll get off of Amazon affiliates. I did not tell you this. I know that this is recorded, but this is a deep fake. All right. All right, cool. And we're done.